we'll get to the murder of Charlie Kirk and the hot and cold running hypocrisy coming from all directions about it and about political violence in this country in a moment. But there is a more important story. Rather than reacting to Russia's drone attack on Poland the way that he did, what's with Russia violating Poland's airspace with drones? Here we go. It could have been worse. Trump could have done the Martin Sheen bit from the movie Dead Zone, whereas the messianic psychopathic president Greg Stillson, he starts World War III and announces, "The missiles are flying. Hallelujah. Hallelujah." That would be worse. Although, to be fair, it would indicate that Trump had had some idea what was happening. What's with Russia violating Poland's airspace? Seriously, asshole? That's your job, you great decaying pile of burger grease. You are the one who is supposed to know what's with Russia violating Poland's airspace. And if you don't know, get the F out. Get the F out now. Turn the government over to a general or an ex-general or somebody who understands that your owner Putin played you again, and that when everybody in this country with an IQ greater than 47 had said that we have to support Ukraine because if we do not stop Putin in Ukraine, his next stop would be Poland, and you twisted your bulbous, useless face into that stupid 45-degree angled smirk, you were wrong. And everybody else in America, all 340,111,000 of us, we were right. Trump, there are 10,000 American troops in Poland. Did you know that? What would have happened if mere debris from one of the Russian drones destroyed in midair had hit a U.S. base in Poland or hit one U.S. soldier in Poland? What would you have done then, Trump? Tweet out a shrug emoji? Does it even register anymore that even in the narrowest of possible views of this disaster, Trump is the commander-in-chief? He is responsible for keeping American soldiers safe in Poland. In many respects, it not only could be worse than this, Trump not realizing Putin had attacked Poland, just did his test marketing for an attempt to rebuild the 1980s Soviet Union, attacked Poland to see if he could get any response from Trump besides "Dai." It not only could be worse than that, it is in fact worse than that. For the second time in 2 days, somebody Trump thinks is his friend on the international stage deliberately attacked an American ally whom Trump had personally just been shown with. The president of Poland was at the White House last week, and Putin sent drones over his country this week. Just like the way Trump took the bribe of a free jet that'll actually cost $1 billion from Qatar in May, and then Netanyahu bombed Qatar this week while Qatar was trying to negotiate a ceasefire, and Trump's inert response to this was to say he disapproved. Trump does not realize that Netanyahu first, and now Putin, have attacked him by proxy. They needed to see just how brain dead he is, how unfit for a true international crisis that they could provoke he would be. And the answer is, you have no flippin' idea. I mean, in the past, Trump has at least pretended to be opposed to Putin taking over all of Western Europe and then having too much strength for us to stop him taking over anything else he wanted on any other continent he wanted. I thought there would be something, at least pretending to be furious, something that indicated he understood the grave implications of what Putin did in Poland, even if it were somehow an accident, which it was not. The Russian dictator attacked mainstream Europe Tuesday night, and Trump couldn't even be bothered to come up with good, phony outrage. or yet another toothless deadline by which Putin had better make nice, or Trump will sanction Russia's import of American ketchup or gold-plated toilets, something. There are 1,000 problems with having a deteriorating, low IQ narcissist as the leader of your country, and we discover a new one every day, but this is the real problem. When the problems he has to confront are not something that come from the diseased mind of Stephen Miller, nor the half-baked one of Sean Hannity, he has no idea what to do. Poland attacked? What up with that? You would think that at some point even the drunkards and religious nuts and terminal PTSD cases who make up the Republican caucuses in the House and Senate would realize that the, future of the planet is at stake. And all the president can come up with as a response to Russian aggression 500 miles east of Berlin is, here we go! Even the Tim Burchetts and Derek Van Ordens and Tim Scotts would have to realize that, never mind the world being exponentially more at risk today than it was Tuesday afternoon, that their own asses are exponentially more at risk today than they were Tuesday afternoon. But who am I kidding? A Democratic congresswoman reminds the House yesterday that gender-affirming care that they want to eliminate includes, quote, boob jobs and Botox. And she seriously and steadfastly announces that she supports boob jobs and Botox, and Nancy Mace starts screaming, literally shouting on the floor of the House because she's a little sensitive that her ex-communications director outed her boob job. I think the ex-communications director meant the boob job they did between Nancy's ears. That's what Republicans are worried about. That and Charlie Kirk. Not Putin going over the edge and the Poles having to shoot down the drones he lobbed into their country just to see if anybody would react appropriately. We were just tested. Trump failed. As always with Trump and Putin, I am reminded of Neville Chamberlain and Hitler, but this time it is something new. Among the dozens of stupid, gullible mistakes the pre-war British Prime Minister made was his assumption that his appeasement of Hitler meant the Germans would always view Russia as the enemy, and if war came, Germany and England would somehow work together to fight Russia and not each other. Then, on the 23rd of August, 1939, the Nazi Foreign Minister Ribbentrop flew to the Kremlin and signed a non-aggression pact with the Soviets, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. Chamberlain had a trusted advisor, a man even more naive than himself, Sir Horace Wilson. And the legend goes that as Molotov and Ribbentrop were meeting in Moscow, Prime Minister Chamberlain was on vacation, up country somewhere, fishing. And that's where Horace Wilson rushed to find Chamberlain the shocking news that the communists and the Nazis were suddenly on the same side and England was screwed. He rushed there to tell Chamberlain this. The story goes that Wilson found Chamberlain in a stream, in waist-high boots, waders, trying to catch, I don't know, minnows. Chamberlain blandly asked him, "What are you doing here, Horace?" And Wilson shouted, "Hitler has done a deal with Stalin. They've signed a non-aggression pact." And Chamberlain laughed. "Oh, no, Horace. You must have misheard." Wilson then screamed, "Ribbentrop is having dinner with Molotov in the Kremlin right now." And it finally sunk in on Chamberlain that for years Hitler had been playing him like the proverbial $2 banjo. His response then supposedly was, "Great Scott! We must recall Parliament immediately." And Chamberlain wasn't deranged, or a foreign agent, or an utter imbecile, or in mental decline, or all of the above like Trump. He was just wrong. We have a Chamberlain who doesn't even have the presence of mind to shout, "Great Scott!" when Putin attacks Poland. My God, Putin could launch nuclear missiles at this country and they could interrupt Trump rereading the Epstein files while ketchup bonging. And Trump would say, here we go, or I disapprove, or oh no, General, you must have misheard. And then the next sound would have been the astronauts on the space station looking out the portholes and one of them saying, hey, what was that noise down there? Speaking of nobody noticing, anybody notice that Ghislaine Maxwell's previous lawyer went on CNN and admitted that there was a quid pro quo that got her moved from a high-octane Florida prison to Club Fed in Texas? Anybody notice that at all? That now there is yet another Trumpstein cover-up already in progress? Anybody? Arthur Aidala, Maxwell's attorney in her sex trafficking trial 3 years ago, yeah, that went well for both of them, goes on CNN and is asked about why Maxwell suddenly got better digs after she lied to Trump's ex-lawyer, the assistant attorney general, about how he had nothing to do with Epstein and how she had nothing to do with Epstein and how nobody had nothing to do with Epstein. Mr. Aidala then says, when anybody who's represented by a lawyer who knows what they're doing, there's always a quid pro quo. The larger context of that quote is important, but it doesn't materially change what Mr. Aidala said, and everybody has foolishly skated past. He is asked, and he responds, here's the full quote, well, there are things I'm not allowed to talk about, right? So there are things I can't talk about. Obviously, I can talk in generalities. Anybody who's represented by a lawyer who knows what they're doing goes in and meets with the government. There's always a quid pro quo. Anytime the government wants information from a citizen, the citizen says, well, I have a right to remain silent. If you want me to give up that right, I need something in return. Usually it's a plea bargain. Usually your charges are going to be lowered and your exposure. That's the confirmation that Trump has already made a deal with Ghislaine Maxwell about the Epstein files. Never mind pardoning her later or commuting the sentence or whatever is to come. Trump has already made a deal as part of the Trumpstein cover-up, and we have as the source for this Maxwell's former attorney. Which takes us to the other new Trumpstein cover-up of the week, the birthday book. It's his signature. I've already posted my letter from Trump online. It's the same signature. He has written thousands of suck-up letters. I got one. They are all his signature. He calls in news crews now to watch him sign his name. He loves signing his name. It's his signature. There are two forms of it. One, he just signs Donald, and the other he signs Donald Trump. B, if you think it isn't his signature, it has to have been forged in 2003 by Epstein? Somebody actually suggested Epstein forged that whole disgusting drawing, and maybe the whole book, with obviously great prescience. I know what's going to happen 22 years from now after I'm dead and Trump is reelected president. I mean, the same kind of prescience that fits the Trump theory that the Obama birth certificate was faked in Hawaii in 1961. That's some long-term planning. Man, we need those guys running the government. Caroline Levitt said the book isn't fake and the letters aren't fake, but that's not Trump's signature. And you could see something new on her face as she said that. It was a pout of annoyance that she so obviously had to bullshit on his behalf. Once again, I posit that for whatever perverse reason, the guy most interested in keeping the Trumpstein saga alive, because part of a predator's nature is to compulsively boast, is Trump himself. Quote, I don't comment on something that's a dead issue. I gave all comments to the staff. It's a dead issue. Yeah, except Trump had insisted the letter from him to Epstein didn't exist. Not, I've seen it, it's a fake. Jeffrey had that printed up. It didn't exist. Oh, it exists. But it's not his signature. But it exists. But it didn't exist. But it's not his signature. But it, and on and on and on. It's a dead issue. The only dead issue around here is the naive belief that Trump isn't the star of the Epstein files. Trump can't help himself. The other day he said crime in Washington would be literally down to zero if only they stopped calling those problems that a man and wife have in the home crimes. In other words, decriminalize domestic violence. A call to decriminalize domestic violence is a bad look for a guy who buried his first wife out back on the golf course. The MAGAs who actually cared about the Epstein prosecution, for whatever reason, Tom Massey and such, are still pushing to force a House vote to release all the DOJ files, a vote by the end of the month. Mike Johnson, Mike, Trump was an FBI informant, but I want to emphasize, I never said Trump was an FBI informant, Johnson. He can manipulate the rules to prevent that vote as is about to happen on that day, which, of course, will only inflame the case again and anew at the end of this month. It's as if Trump is planning ahead to make sure this story never goes away. And once again, some of the denials are hilarious. You'd think with this much of a story, they would have worked on them. Just take a day and everybody come up with a good denial. President Trump's legal team will continue to aggressively pursue litigation, Levitt wrote. That does not mean they are suing about this story. Continue to aggressively pursue litigation? About what? And anyway, in this story, they can't sue. There's discovery, and never mind Trump being deposed about Epstein and girls. Any records, any letters, anything on a computer somewhere would immediately be in the hands of Rupert Murdoch. Then there was the denial from Congressman Derek Van Orden, whose CTE seems to be getting worse. He called the signature, the book, the drawing, a, quote, fallacy. Fallacy is not only the wrong word, a fallacy is an erroneous belief, not a fake item of some kind. But fallacy is also a partial homonym for the word phallic. Nice Freudian slip, Derek. And most interestingly, did you see any defense of Trump about this book, about his poem, about the drawing, about the signature from his children, from his wife, from his friends, if he has any? The only time the family factored into this was when my former ESPN colleague Molly Knight finished the week's adventures in Trumpstein land with the searing mot juste that this was an awful tough way for Don Jr. to find out that his dad does too send birthday cards. Lastly, no, I'm not in favor of shooting commentators. I'm a commentator. But my God, can we stop with the hypocrisy about this? This is America. All we have done for virtually all of our history is shoot political opponents. The biggest politically based entertainment hit of this century is a play about Alexander Hamilton, who was shot by the Vice President of the United States. Add to that 220-year legacy, this new America that MAGA wanted, where the military is politicized and politics are militarized, and the fact that Trump has spent the last decade stochastically encouraging terrorism against and assassination of his opponents, where conservatives repeatedly call for the killing of Trump's opponents. I mean, Trump was shot a year ago, and not one of his supporters was willing to support meaningful gun restrictions. No, guns have no place in America. There might as well be a gun on the flag. So you can have many reactions to the death of Charlie Kirk, and I hope sorrow and disgust are among them for you as they are for me. But what should not be among them is surprise. And again, you can be utterly opposed to shooting people without repeating America's age-old lie to itself, that comforting lie that violence has no part in our political system. It is woven in as surely as the stars on the flag. Sorry. Are you opposed to this? I am. Say you're opposed to it. Don't pretend this is some great shock. For the record, to be fair, I don't think anybody shouted "kill yourself" at me in public since 2017, maybe 18. But do you think the death threats to me have ever stopped? The ones that started in 2006? They have not. And each one of them has not surprised me. We've had 46 different presidents, and 4 were killed by guns, and a 5th was injured by a gun, and 2 were shot while campaigning to return to office, and at least 12 others were the targets of credible assassination plots, almost always involving guns. That's 19. Hell, Gerald Ford was shot at from close range twice in a span of 17 days, 50 years ago this month. Pick any day on your calendar, and it's the anniversary of somebody getting shot or shot at in the political environment of this country. And what have we had in this country during those times when we haven't just had a president or politician shot at, or a commentator shot at? We've had a constant escalating call for violence and murder, and the latest rage among right-wing commentators, public executions. Quote, death penalty should be public, should be quick, it should be televised. I think at a certain age, it's an initiation. One commentator said in February of last year, he proposed making kids above the age of 12 making them watch public executions. He suggested guillotines be used. He suggested pay-per-view television of these things, sponsored by Coca-Cola. And he wanted to broaden the definition of capital offenses. The same commentator also wanted the death penalty for opposing Trump. Quote, as far as other death penalties, I think what some of those guys did to Donald Trump to use the instruments of government to destroy the constitutional order, that should be under consideration. And the same commentator thought it was just too bad that there's this estimated 393 million guns in this country, and that there would be gun deaths always, but that was a fair trade-off because that was the way to protect the Second Amendment. And that quote, and the one before it, and the one before that, those all are from Charlie Kirk. This is from April 5th, 2023.
You will never live in a society when you have an armed citizenry and you won't have a single gun death. That is nonsense. It's drivel. Wow. But I think it's worth it. I think it's worth to have a cost of, unfortunately, some gun deaths every single year so that we can have the Second Amendment to protect our other God-given rights. That is a prudent deal. It is rational. Nobody talks like this. They live in a complete alternate universe.
Charlie Kirk, April 5, 2023. Did he deserve to get shot because he said that? No. I have a very ask not for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee assessment of this situation, particularly when it comes to political commentators. No, we should not kill commentators with guns. We should not kill presidents with guns. We should not kill Americans with guns. Say it. Dedicate yourself to it, live it, act to make America into the other place. Maybe for the first time in 200 years. But please, the cliches and the empty words and the how could this happen in America and the we are in a bad place and it's getting worse, they are meaningless. We have always been in this place. They are as meaningless words as are the insulting fallbacks about thoughts and prayers. I wish it were otherwise. In many ways, I have dedicated my life to trying to make it otherwise. But this is who we are.
This is Countdown with Keith Olbermann.
Still ahead on this edition of Countdown, 24 years. Using the old midpoint theory of making your jaw drop about how long ago something actually was, 24 years since 9/11. The midpoint theory notes that 24 years before 9/11 would have been September 11th, 1977. I was 18, Carter was president, I was in college, covering World Trade Center future hero Eamon McEnany as he starred in lacrosse and football. He was only 22. I covered 9/11 for 40 days without a break on TV, on radio, locally, and on networks, and I don't know how many people I met or stories I covered on the streets of New York in those stricken months. But for all the time since, one guy who that day did not get closer than 75 blocks away from Ground Zero, his story still resonates with me in the way no other story from that day does. Let me tell you about Tomas Reyes, the man who wasn't there, next in Things I Promised Not to Tell. First, believe it or not, there's still more new idiots to talk about, the roundup of the miscreants, morons, and Dunning-Kruger effect specimens who constitute today's other worst persons in the world. The bronze, worse. Remember when J.D. Vance wrote, quote, "Killing cartel members who poison our fellow citizens is the highest and best use of our military." Well, he was raked over the coals for that, and appropriately so, except by someone named Jennifer M. Greenberg, who retweeted this and added, "It would be wise for those criticizing J.D. Vance to recall that his mother was a drug addict who nearly died multiple times right in front of him. This issue is extremely personal to him, and he cannot be expected to have any sympathy with cartels." Okay, look, I get it. We all have something in our lives that we view out of proportion. And it's a good thing that we do that, advocating for something that is not the most important thing in the world or the most important factor in how the world should be conducted. Having people advocate for these things is essential, or these things will never get addressed or done or even known about. And this is not to diminish addiction or opioids or fentanyl or the damage that they can do secondhand to a child if their parent succumbs to these things. But functioning in the real world, being a real human being, is knowing when the greater issue you are dealing with is so large, and your personal responsibility for that greater issue is so large that you have to, for a moment, put your own history aside. Or at minimum, you have to not let it be the decisive part of your actions or even of your public pronouncements. For J.D. Vance, who I think is an irreparably failed human being, I grieve about his mother. For J.D. Vance, Vice President of the United States, you do not have the right to violate the Constitution, turn the U.S. military into a death squad against people who may have been criminals and may have just been guys on a boat, and you certainly do not have the right to glory in the war crime you have just participated in because of what happened to your mother. War crime, Mr. Vance. War crime, Ms. Greenberg. When he goes to trial someday, they are not going to let J.V. Vance off with probation because of what happened to his mother, tragic as it is. On that level, this is almost as stupid as pointing to Trump's crazy mother and father and saying, "You want to know what's wrong with him? Take a look at them." At some point, they don't factor into it. Vance is long past that point. So no, Ms. Greenberg, I have no sympathy for the cartels either. And we have no evidence the people our government murdered in the Caribbean were part of any cartel. So, Ms. Greenberg, kindly shut the F up. And, Mr. Vance, if that was a factor in what you wrote, resign and turn yourself in to the International Court of Justice. Runner-up, rarely it is that I get surprised by these anymore, but this is from a host on the Ben Shapiro shit show, The Daily Wire. This guy used to work for Glenn Beck's The Blaze, and he's an author of some kind, and I'll identify him after I read his quote, which I think will speak for itself in many respects. Quote, so much of what is tyrannical in this country arose from the post-Civil War amendments and the civil rights laws that have been taken over by the left and used to silence people and strip us of our free association rights. I'm obviously in favor of civil rights and that everybody gets treated fairly, but the left takes over every social issue, and the Civil War kind of left us, in many ways, less free than we were. No, this was not written by Robert E. Lee, back from the dead, nor Jefferson Davis. So opposing political violence with all my heart, I still want to say that I believe the Second Amendment is as important today as when it was written. The Second Amendment was enacted because the states asked the question, if the federal government is going to have an army, how would we defend ourselves against the federal government, right? Well, despite that last-minute tangent off into a real understanding of what the Second Amendment is, the guy is arguing that the Civil War weakened personal freedom. You know, abolition and the right to vote for all first males and then people above a given age, and then they lowered the age, and then, you know, anti-segregation and lynching. Those are all apparently impositions on his rights. The subtext here is the Ku Klux Klan and the National Rifle Association and the Federalist Society Supreme Court, the leaders in domestic terrorism since 1865, and how they have been mistreated by the libs. When we gave them the right not to be slaves anymore, we never said they could be president. Now, the name of the speaker of that, Andrew Klavan, 70-year-old something son of Gene Klavan. A lot of people of a certain age from the same area that I'm from gasped just now. Gene Klavan, for 40 years, was one of the great, generous, inclusive people of New York City radio, a legend, a brilliant comedian, maybe a creative genius, and a creative genius on a morning radio show, when most people, myself included from a personal experience, most people are zombies on morning radio. Not Gene Klavan. So when they say the apple didn't fall far from the tree, sometimes the apple shrivels and rots and turns into Andrew Klavan. Everything would have been fine if we hadn't had that Civil War. But our winner, Jeff Shell. I've told my story with Jeff Shell before. The short version is this. One of three executives at Fox Sports, working for Rupert Murdoch, whom I could trust not to lie to me or to everybody else every hour, really enjoyed his company. He gave me advice that benefited me at the expense of the company sometimes. When he switched to NBC and I was leaving MSNBC in 2010 and 11, he tried to talk me out of it. When they made him chairman of NBC in 2019, I reached out the night the rumor broke, and he reached back like 2 hours later, said he wanted to talk about having me go back on the air anchoring at MSNBC. And then we went back and forth. There was that little pandemic that slowed things down. But after the pandemic ended, we still went back and forth for nearly 2 years with him scheduling meetings with me and then canceling the meetings and then scheduling meetings with me and the head of NBC News and him and then canceling those meetings. And then the whole thing finally blew up. And 10 years of negotiations of various seriousness came to a final end in the fall of 2021. And Shell put out a statement to a media reporter, because it leaked after 10 years of secrecy, that he was never really thinking of having me come back to MSNBC, and it was all my fault because I didn't realize that he was lying, and I should have known he was lying. Now that's a flex. In 2023, NBC fired Jeff Shell on the spot for cause, and he was chairman for a really sleazy affair and job manipulation thing with a CNBC talent. And he went to sue them, and of all the lawyers in the world, he went to my lawyer. And she began the process of representing him and vetting the case, and I never even said anything to her. I didn't say, you can't represent him, I will go somewhere. I didn't do anything. We never talked about it. I found about it in the papers that he was going there. And the next thing I know, there's no lawsuit. My lawyer sends me a quick email going, in case you were worried, I'm not representing him. He didn't get any money. He was just done. They fired him, and in that rare case of somebody getting fired from a job like that, it was, and don't let the door hit you in the ass on the way out, Jeff Shell. And then these fascists, these Ellisons, who are merging CBS and their company and bringing in the ridiculous Barry Weiss, hired Jeff Shell to run CBS. And Jeff Shell, from whom I have email after email after email in which he agrees from 2019 and 2020 that Trump is going to kill us all and Trump must be stopped. Jeff Shell has become a Trumpist inside man at CBS, like the parasite he actually is, collaborating with the insertion of a Trumpist plant inside CBS News to oversee what CBS News reports from here on and what it is no longer permitted to report. CBS has appointed a man named Kenneth Weinstein to be the new CBS News ombudsman. Could have been worse, could have been Stephen Miller. Otherwise, this is as bad as it gets. Kenneth Weinstein never worked in news. He was CEO of the Hudson Institute, another fascist think tank. Oliver Darcy in Status wrote, Weinstein's record includes a stream of alarmist rhetoric popular in right-wing media circles. In February, for example, he declared in a New York Post column that women in Europe, quote, can no longer walk safely at night in cities because of the influx of Muslim migrants. In the same piece, he mocked, quote, media elites for warning about NATO's future while deriding the alliance as one that caters to the interests of progressive elites, and insisting it needs to undergo a radical shift. So, Kenneth Weinstein is to use a phrase similar to that, a radical shit. The New York Times added, installing an ombudsman at CBS News was one of Skydance's commitments to the Trump administration. That's a nice way of saying bribe. This year, when the company sought approval for its merger with Paramount. The agreement, in fact, is to keep that ombudsman in place, telling on people and preventing things Trump does not like from getting on the air, or punishing the people who somehow manage to get those things on the air. That job has to be filled for at least 2 years. That is what CBS gave to Donald Trump. Not just the money. The money is for show. The money is for him to boast. The money is for him to stroke his mentally ill ego. The power is Donald Trump now, by proxy, runs CBS News. More from the Times. Weinstein donated roughly $40,000 to Republican and pro-Trump political groups last year, according to federal disclosure forums. That's right, CBS News, you're worth $40,000. Mr. Weinstein has served on federal advisory boards under both Democratic and Republican presidents. In 2020, Mr. Trump nominated him to serve as ambassador to Japan. They never voted on that. He didn't become ambassador. A statement from Paramount said Mr. Weinstein will serve as an independent internal advocate for journalistic integrity and transparency, unquote. No, he will not. He will serve as a Trump spy inside CBS News. And unfortunately, for the vast majority of people there who want to tell you the truth, this is the death of CBS News. So what has this got to do with Jeff Shell, the aforementioned worst person in the world today? Mr. Weinstein, quote, will report to Jeff Shell, the new president of CBS's parent company, Paramount, which recently merged with the Hollywood studio Skydance. Quote, I've known him for many years and have great respect for his integrity, sound judgment, and thoughtful approach to complex issues. Jeff Shell, liar, said in a statement, also praising his, quote, calm, measured perspective. Those quotes from Jeff Shell, who says you should have known he lies all the time. Some men are born whores, some men achieve whoring, and others have whoredom thrust upon them. And then there are creatures like Jeff Shell, whose best defense for betrayal is to publicly say you should have known they were lying, so it's your fault, who achieve the goal of a lifetime, running NBC even in these days. And then they F it up so badly that they not only don't get any severance, but no lawyer thinks they have ground for a lawsuit or even a settlement. Or even a free Uber home. And then they're somehow offered a similar job at another network with one little catch. The little catch is they have to become a fascist. They have to participate in the dismantling of freedom of the press in this country from the position of power in their own industry, which is supposed to defend freedom of the press, of their own country, the dismantling of their own country. Traitor. Just so they can claim they can be president or leader of something again, when they should be cleaning out toilets. And after 5 years, as the old joke goes, they give them a brush. Like Quisling, or Marshall Petain, or Jeff Shell, Parasite, today's other worst person in the world! You should have known I was lying. Nothing of importance happened to me on September 11th, 2001. I mean, against statistical probability, I had friends, acquaintances in each of the two towers and 3 out of the 4 planes, and I only learned of the death of one of them from the missing posters. I rather unexpectedly became a street news reporter for old friends, one who ran an LA TV station and one who ran an LA all-news radio station. I felt more keenly that day than any other in my life that I was the descendant of countless New York cops and firefighters. My grandfather, my mother's father, drove a hook and ladder in the Bronx. I have his badge. I was taken by cops for a series of harrowing behind the police line walks behind Ground Zero. I can still hear in my head the matter-of-factness of a dispatcher's voice coming across one of the radios saying, body parts found on 14th floor of the World Financial Center, and another equally weary and broken voice repeating it. Body parts found on 14th floor of World Financial Center. I didn't see the attacks. My apartment then only faced uptown. When I woke up that morning, all I saw was as beautiful a sky as I had ever seen before, and to this day have ever seen since. By the time I got down to the street, there were already people with glazed eyes and dust-covered shoes and pants who were just reaching my neighborhood from their walk from the Trade Center. The Trade Center was 75 blocks south of where I lived. I was the witness who didn't see anything. However, I had already been on the radio in L.A. 3 times, and I was on my way to Times Square for a television shot when I realized it was now hours later and I hadn't eaten. And I was just passing one of my places, a restaurant called Red Eye Grill, and unbelievably, it was open. Half a dozen waiters, familiar faces, hugs, tears. They made me my regular meal. They didn't charge me for it. Then I went to the restroom to wash up, and there was an attendant in there, and I recognized him too. And after I was finished, being even more embarrassed than usual at the whole process of somebody handing me a washcloth in a bathroom, I reached to give him a tip, and I found exactly 3 quarters in my pocket and a $50 bill in my wallet. And the attendant said, "Oh, I'll take those quarters. I can't use the payphone with a 50. And I didn't understand what he meant. So I asked him, "What do you mean?" He introduced himself. His name was Tomas Reyes. He explained. 2 weeks earlier, Tomas Reyes said he had been laid off by an investment firm that he had worked for downtown. They liked him. He liked them, but jobs like his came and went, and he was out. Fired on August 24th, 2001. But he said they told him that if he wanted to, he could keep his desk for a couple of weeks, maybe even a month. He could come in and use their computer and call around looking for work, maybe even pick up a shift at the firm here and there, freelance. But to that point, in large part because Labor Day had been the previous Monday, and in New York, you leave for Labor Day a week before and you come back a week after, there were no openings yet for him in the investment business or anything else that he could find. But years before, he had worked odd jobs at that place, the Red Eye Grill, including as the attendant in the men's room. And this was the only place where they had offered him a paycheck to do anything. He was still going to his old job and his old desk every day, except when Red Eye called and said they needed him in the men's room. He had been on Wall Street. He was now not just the men's room attendant, he was the backup men's room attendant at a restaurant in Midtown. And that morning, 7 a.m., 7:30, he was going out the door to his desk in the investment firm to work the phones again when his cell phone rang. The guy doing the midday shift in the men's room at Red Eye Grill on 7th Avenue had called in sick. He had, if he wanted it, 8 hours of work coming to him. $60, $75 with tips if he wanted it. And so that was how Tomas Reyes was in the men's room at the Red Eye Grill at 57th Street and 6th Avenue, handing out very few towels to very few customers on September 11th, 2001, rather than sitting at his desk in the World Trade Center. And that is also why he wanted my quarters and not my $50 bill, because he was trying to use the restaurant payphone to call his friends who still worked at the investment firm's office, which was on floors 101, 102, 103, 104, and 105 of World Trade Center Building Number 1. Because his old firm was Cantor Fitzgerald. And he was not there that day only because the full-time men's room attendant at the restaurant had called in sick. And I wished him luck with his phone calls, and I got out of there as quickly as I could because I had seen the video, and he clearly had not seen the video. They were all dead at Cantor Fitzgerald, including two classmates of mine from college, Eamon McEnany, Mike Tanner. They were dead in the pyre of the building in which I had started my television career 20 years and a month before. The brother of another friend of mine was in the other tower. I had a friend, one of my cameramen on my show at Fox Sports, who I'd worked with literally 3 months before, Tom Pecorelli. He was on one plane. The former MSNBC guest Barbara Olson was on another. A hockey acquaintance of mine, Garnet Ace Bailey, was on a third plane. I went to the bar at the Red Eye Grill and I asked the bartender to change the 50 for me and to give me all the coins he could spare. It's probably $5 worth. And I kept 2 10s for myself just in case, and I went back in the men's room and I gave the rest and all the coins to Tomas Reyes for his phone calls. Apparently the battery was gone on his cell. And I hope I did a good job not letting him know that none of his friends would be answering. I mentioned Mike Tanner. I did not know he was dead until much later, September 24th. About Eamon McEnany, I knew right away that morning. He had been one of the heroes of the 1993 attack on the Trade Center. On that day, he had guided a human chain of survivors down 100 flights of smoky stairwells. He worked on one of the uppermost floors, but this time, in 2001, there were no chains for him to lead, though no one who knew him has ever had a second's doubt that he tried. Mike Tanner was the starting quarterback and Eamon McEnany the starting wide receiver in the first sporting event I ever covered for money. $15 from United Press International to cover a Cornell football game in 1976, and wouldn't you know, the only thing that happened all day was Eamon dropping a punt, setting up the other guy's field goal. Cornell loses 3-0, and I'm supposed to write 200 words about it. And telling this story as methodically as possible, I only summon up about 110 words. And the UPI man in Albany taking in my story says, no, that's okay. You don't have to pad it out with 90 words on the early fall weather. We'll still send you the $15, kid. And I found out about Mike Tanner the way too many people found out about loved ones or friends or fellow alumni or just anonymous to them smiling faces who suddenly counted every bit as much as those we knew in that horrible month. Mike's face and name were on a missing poster on Canal Street in Manhattan. I stopped and stared at it for 5 minutes. I missed a report I was supposed to file for KFWB Radio in Los Angeles. Somehow, the circumstances of finding out that way foretold accurately how much shock and pain there was yet to come. But the point is, I had a 9/11 story. And you did too, probably, even at remote distances, even friend of a friend of a friend. Some lucky ones don't. Some went through their entire lives and go through their entire lives still unaffected by 9/11. And now with time, more and more people think of it like Pearl Harbor, like World War II, like the assassination of Lincoln. And it has to be that way, or we would never survive. But for those of us who still have the stories, Democrats have them, and Republicans have them, and those who thought the Iraq War made sense have them, and those who knew it for what it was have them. We were all in that sad thing together, and we always will be. But unfortunately, as the anniversaries of 9/11 began, President Bush and the Republicans were making it clear that somehow their part of this enforced tragic togetherness was more important than the part of their critics. The only positive of 9/11 and the days and weeks and years that so slowly and painfully followed it was the unanimous humanity here in New York and throughout the country. The government, the president in particular, was given every possible measure of support. Those who did not belong to the president's party tabled that reality. Those who doubted the mechanics of his election the year before ignored that. Those who wondered about his qualifications forgot that. Nearly unanimous support of his government was granted. And that is something that cannot be taken away from that government by its critics. It can only be squandered by those who use it, not to heal a nation's wounds, but to take political advantage of them. Terrorists did not come and steal our newly regained sense of being American first and political 50th, nor did the Democrats, nor did the media, nor did the people. The president and those around him and those who followed him in his party, they did that. They promised bipartisanship and then showed that to them bipartisanship meant that their party would rule and the rest of us would follow or be branded with ever-escalating hysteria as morally or intellectually confused, as appeasers, as those who, in Vice President Cheney's words, validate the strategy of the terrorists. These men promised protection and then showed that to them protection meant going to war against a despot whose hand they had once shaken, who did not have WMD, who did not have a damn thing to do with 9/11, against whom plans had been laid many years before 9/11. The polite phrase for how so many of us were duped into supporting a war, or at least acquiescing to it on the false premise that it had something to do with 9/11, is lying by inference. The impolite phrase is war crime. The America we live in now, in which one party believes its hatred is love, its fascism is freedom, its depravity is purity, that began as the 9/11 anniversaries began to follow one upon the other. After taking cynical advantage of the unanimity and the love and transmuting it into fraudulent war and needless death, after monstrously transforming it into fear and suspicion and turning that fear into the campaign slogan of election after election, we arrived in a world in which, when Trump enacted the worst imaginable cliche, wrapping himself in a flag, wrapping himself in the American flag, the morons thought, that proved he loved America. So too have they succeeded in this, and are still succeeding. And still, although they don't call it that, this government, well, the government of Trump, the government in waiting of Trump, uses 9/11, uses the hatreds of 9/11 as a wedge to pit Americans against Americans. This is an odd point at which to cite a television program, especially one from March 1960. But long ago, a series called The Twilight Zone broadcast a riveting episode called The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street. In brief, a meteor sparks rumors of an invasion by extraterrestrials disguised as humans. The electricity goes out in a neighborhood. One neighbor pleads for calm. Suddenly, his lights, and only the lights in his house, go back on. Someone therefore suggests he must be the alien. Then another man's car starts suddenly. As charges and suspicion and panic overtake the street, guns are inevitably produced. An alien is shot. He turns out to be just another neighbor who was returning from going for help. The camera then pulls back to a nearby hill where two extraterrestrials are seen manipulating a small device that can jam electricity. The veteran tells his novice that there's no need to actually attack. You just turn off a few of the human machines and then, quote, they pick the most dangerous enemy they can find, and it's themselves. And then in perhaps his finest piece of writing, Rod Serling sums it up with words of remarkable prescience, given where we have found ourselves in ever-increasing measures since September 11th, 2001. The tools of conquest do not necessarily come with bombs and explosions and fallout. There are weapons that are simply thoughts, attitudes, prejudices, to be found only in the minds of men. For the record, prejudices can kill, and suspicion can destroy, and a thoughtless, frightened search for a scapegoat has a fallout all its own for the children and the children yet unborn. I've done all the damage I can do here. Thank you for listening. I will never forget Mr. Reyes. Most of our countdown music was arranged, produced, and performed by Brian Ray and John Philip Chanel. Our musical directors of Countdown, it was produced by TKO Brothers. Mr. Ray was on the guitars, bass, and drums. Mr. Chanel handled orchestration and keyboards. Our satirical and pithy musical comments are by the best baseball stadium organist ever, Nancy Faust. The Olbermann theme from ESPN2, written by Mitch Warren Davis, courtesy of ESPN Inc., is our sports music. Other music arranged and performed by the group No Horns Allowed. My announcer today was my friend Tony Kornheiser, who has just re-upped for another 3 years, co-hosting Pardon the Interruption on the Worldwide Leader. One of the great fun days of my life. I co-hosted that show with Tony, I guess 3 or 4 times. He said it was one of the great thrills of his career, and I said, boy, you haven't had much of a career, have you? In any event, congratulations, my friend. I'm delighted to see you will still be working at age 206. Everything else was, as always, my fault, and that's Countdown for today, day 235 of America Held Hostage Again, and just 1,237 days until the scheduled end of Trump's lame duck and lame-brained term, unless he is removed sooner by MAGA and Epstein or the pavement on his hand or wherever his signature turns up next. In any event, the next scheduled countdown is Monday. Until then, I'm Keith Olbermann. Good morning, good afternoon, good night, and good luck.